In 1994, James Reed decided to join the family business after being pushed off the fence by his father.
My father said to me, there's no point having a family business if there's no one else in the family in it. Do you want to join me or not? And I was sort of sitting on the fence. He made me an offer I couldn't refuse.
It became the defining decision of his career, not because it was obvious, but because he saw it as a risk. He had already set himself on a different path and worried about living up to his father, knowing that if it went wrong, it could mean leaving the business altogether.
It was a good decision, but at the time, it wasn't an easy decision because I had anxieties around it. I remember someone saying, it's better to paddle your own canoe, even if your father has a ship.
What Reed learned from that decision and from the many mistakes, reinventions and bets that followed became a simple rule.
The worst decision would be to stop trying things.
That outlook would guide him in the boardroom and beyond, even on a mountain where a near-death experience reminded him to live more purposefully.
It changed me as a person, it changed the way I think, and it changed my priorities. I'm grateful for that.
These are James Reed's executive decisions. Your story is a multi-generational one, and it would be remiss of me not to start off by talking about your father as well, Sir Alec Reed, who passed recently and was such an enormous influence to you. How big an influence is your father still in your career?
Well, firstly, Steve, thank you for inviting me to talk to you. My father was a huge influence and continues to be in my career. I mean, he's a wonderful entrepreneur, a wonderful man, a great philanthropist, and above all, sort of inspiring. So he inspired me as a kid and continues to do so now in my adult life. So I'm very grateful. I feel very lucky both to have known him, but particularly to have been able to call him Dad. I mean, he was a special man. He died recently, as you say. He's left a huge hole.
He started Reed in 1960, I think, in Hounslow with a £75 pot of money to build his business. Do you know really what galvanized him, what made him do that rather than following into someone else's company, for instance?
Yeah, I do. He was very frustrated that he couldn't put his ideas into practice at Gillette's, where he worked before. And they were kind enough to give him awards for his ideas, but he was a sort of ideas machine. He had a genius for ideas. And he was very frustrated. He just wanted to do his own thing and be self-employed. I remember him saying, all I wanted was to be self-employed. If I could earn as much money as I did at Gillette, I'd have been happy with that. So he set up on his own, and my granny used to help him do the books. And he worked on his own for a year in Hounslow. But what's interesting, he told me more recently that he made a profit from the first week. He said he didn't need any money to start the company. I mean, you mentioned £75, which is not much. No. But he said that the business took off from the first week. And he said he had two ideas that made that happen. The most important was he charged more than everyone else, which is quite an interesting entry strategy for a business. Sure. And he realized that he could do that because there was such demand for staff. And there was such demand for staff because Heathrow Airport was being expanded. And just by his good fortune, he was born in Hounslow, the borough of London, West London, best known now for Heathrow Airport, which is right in the middle of it.
Your grandfather has some fame as well. Am I right in saying that your grandfather during the Second World War was part of the Ministry of Information and actually was part of the team which came up with perhaps one of the most famous phrases of all time, which was keep calm and carry on?
Yeah, that's right. My grandfather, Leonard, he was a graphic artist and he worked in the Ministry of Information and was responsible with the team there for producing propaganda posters. And that was the poster Keep Calm and Carry On, which was going to be put up had the Germans landed and invaded. And apparently this was a phrase he used to sort of use around the house during the Blitz. And then it ended up on the poster. And so, I feel fortunate. I come from a family of artists and entrepreneurs. My dad's always complaining there are too many artists, not enough entrepreneurs, Steve. Yeah. But I think they have something in common. I mean, entrepreneurs and artists, they never retire. They just love what they do and they keep going. And I feel blessed to have that. So you found inspiration from day one from your family around you as well. Did you think you were always going to move into the family business? Or I know you were at various places beforehand. It wasn't a fait accompli that you'd necessarily carry on in the family business? No, it wasn't. I suppose reflecting back now, I was worried about following in such big shoes. I mean, he was very successful. He was well loved in the business. I thought, well, I don't want to mess that up.
Yeah.
So it was important to me to sort of learn and do my own thing and get pay rises and promotions elsewhere under my own banner. And I suppose I was very lucky because I was always interested in working for entrepreneurs. Maybe it was something about growing up in an entrepreneurial family.
What was the guiding mission for you in your early part of it? Did you always know that by the late 90s you would probably go into the family company, or actually did you think about going on other routes first?
Well, I suppose I thought in my 20s, I thought this is a great opportunity, being young, to try stuff and find out what I really like doing and what I enjoy and maybe even might be good at. So I think it's an opportunity for young people to do that because, before you get too tied down with sort of mortgages and families and things, have a go at stuff, try things. So that was a big part of my plan. And I suppose as I got closer to 30, I started having children. That was when I began to think more seriously about joining the family business because my father said to me basically, there's no point having a family business if there's no one else in the family in it. He'd turned 60. Do you want to join me or not? And I was sort of sitting on the fence. And he made me an offer I couldn't refuse, as they say.
Didn't he actually turn around to you saying something along the lines of, look, the job is going to be advertised in the Sunday Times appointments section next week. Do you want to apply or not?
Yeah, that's exactly what he said, Steve. And that got me off the fence. And I'm very glad it did. He had to give me a shove and it got me off the fence. And I joined him. This was in the spring of 1994. And, you talk about decisions. I look back on that and think that was a really good decision.
Was that the best decision you've ever made?
Yeah, well, probably, yeah, looking back, because I wasn't sure at the time whether it was a good decision.
So it was a hard decision.
It was a hard decision because there was quite a lot to weigh up.
Yeah.
The company was coming out of a recession. It was growing. There were actually 3 different jobs he asked me to consider. And the job I took was an operations director job. So it was a difficult job. And I took that job because I wanted to find out whether I could do it or not. And so I took a bit of a risk because if I couldn't do it, I knew that then the rest of my career wasn't here, sort of thing.
So it wasn't obvious that you would ultimately fill the shoes of your father and become the CEO of Reed?
No, definitely not. No. I mean, there was a very capable managing director there at the time who I worked for. So, no, it wasn't obvious. And I needed to earn my spurs, so to speak. The company was and continues to be a very competitive business, working in a very competitive
Despite
market.
the fact that your father started the business model by charging more than others.
Yeah, well, that just shows.
Which you couldn't do now.
Well, I wouldn't advise it, but maybe in some sectors. I wouldn't want to do it in ours. It was a good decision, but at the time, it wasn't an easy decision because I had anxieties around it. And, I was enjoying my work at the BBC. I remember someone saying, it's better to paddle your own canoe, even if your father has a ship.
Yeah.
And there's some truth in that.
You said when you took over, you'd be very worried about how you would cope during harder times. Can you think of any examples where you've made the wrong decision or you've made a bad decision for the business and how that has affected you and how you reacted thereafter?
I don't know if they were bad decisions. I mean, sometimes you make a decision with the best information and then it doesn't work out. So I'm thinking particularly of investments that we've made where we've tried to start a new venture or open an office in a new market. And I'm thinking of quite a few places that we used to have offices in, we don't anymore, or the lines of business that we started that we didn't succeed at. But I think that's a vital part of being an entrepreneur. You have to keep trying things. And the worst decision would be to stop trying things. So we've made lots of mistakes. Do I think of them as bad decisions? No, not really. I mean, I think I was thinking the other day, what is a life? And life's a lot of different things, but in a way it's an accumulation of decisions. You decide to do one thing, then the next. And our business has had a good life so far. We've made bad decisions, sure. But the good thing about making a decision is you can always make another one. And that's what you should do. I think the worst thing is sort of being frozen in the headlights and not making a decision.
Yeah, change is good. Change is always going to happen. Change is going to happen around you, but it's a question of how you adapt as a business as well, and how you adapt as a person.
Well, it might be bad. I mean, but change is inevitable.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing stands still. And so you've got to try and go with it. And if the change looks bad, are there any opportunities it throws up? In a recession, actually, it's a great time to hire talented people. There are lots of great people available if you go looking in a recession. It's a great time to acquire assets that may be cheaper than usual. So there's always something you can do, whatever the environment, that would help carry your business forward, I think.
I want to just explore the relationship between you and your father and that handover a little bit more, if I may, as well. You couldn't have had a different start from your father. Your father was 16 and left school, and yet that didn't stop him having multiple professorialships and doctorates later on in life.
He was a late developer.
But you had the most extraordinarily privileged education. St. Paul's, Christchurch, Oxford, MBA, Harvard Business School as well. It couldn't have been more different from your father.
Do you know what? Yeah, that's very interesting, and it's absolutely true. So he left school at 16, and his mother insisted he went to night school to learn get some qualification. Eventually, after multiple attempts, became qualified as an accountant, and subsequently got awarded 3 doctorates, and he was a professor 3 times, and he did really well in that respect. But he was always very keen that we should get a good education. I mean, he earned his own money, and he came from a very humble background, but he was really keen to invest that in us, me and my siblings, in a good education. So I was the first member of my family to go to university, for instance. But I remember him telling me when I was about 8, "No, you should go to Oxford." And it was sort of in my head. He sort of planted it as a goal as a kid. And he'd never been to Oxford. I think barely knew where it was. So he sort of planted this.
That's interesting.
And then I was thinking, I better go to Oxford then. So I sort of made that a sort of goal. And I did. And then I remember him saying, "Well, you should probably go to business school. The best one's Harvard." And he was very good at sort of planting these sort of ideas and sort of encouraging me in that way. And I enjoyed learning. I still do. I'm a curious person, as was he. So I enjoyed the experience of learning, studying, and I thought, well, I want to get as knowledgeable as I can so that I can go out and use this education. I never thought of education as something that finished when you got your degree. The whole point of it was to go and apply it in the world, I thought.
But you and I grew up, you're a little bit older than me, but not much. We grew up in a time when actually, if you were hardworking, moderately smart, and I say moderately in my case, a lot smarter in your case, you could get a job. It wasn't hard to get a job. And if you worked really hard, you could get a good career as well. Did we need that kind of level of education when you and I were hitting the workforce in the 80s and 90s?
Well, it was certainly, I think it's harder to get a job now. I mean, there were periods in the 80s.
Now very different.
But there were periods in the 80s when it was very hard to get a job. The unemployment was very high early in the 80s.
Yeah.
And there were periods in the 90s when it's easy to forget now. It can change quite quickly. 3 years ago, it was very easy to get a job, and now it's not. So,
but specifically when we were growing up, though, there were jobs galore, weren't there, James?
There were lots of jobs. Yeah, and I think one of the things that was different then is that there were lots of opportunities for young people, teenagers, to go and work part-time, do sort of holiday jobs, work in the supermarkets. And I remember working in an ice cream van at Thorpe Park and doing all sorts of funny jobs, which was really quite formative, actually. I look back on that and think, actually, I learned quite a lot about people.
Did you learn a lot out of your first job, James? Which I think I know what it was. I think I'm right in saying I know what your first job was.
My first job, I'll tell you what it was, just in case was working in a cemetery, levelling graves in Old Windsor. I learned from that job that I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. I tell you, because it was cold.
Probably wasn't
it was
a lot
hard.
of career progression there, was
No, it was cold, but it was quite well paid, $2.50 an hour at the time, which was quite good. And it was tough. It was a tough job, but I'm glad I did it. I remember it fondly.
How do you feel about the accusation, or indeed the comment that actually nepotism it was rife for many people, and for you as well? That was how you got your job. That's how you got your big break as well, and the importance of it.
Well, I would say guilty as charged. I can't see it any other way. Yeah, it is nepotism, but I think it's interesting how you approach that. I remember feeling that as a pressure, not as a gift. I remember thinking, I've got to work harder than everyone else because they're going to be looking. They're going to think, oh, that's Alec Reed's son. What's he doing?
Yeah.
So I've got to make sure, I felt that I had to be as hard working as the hardest working person. And I really wanted to do well. So I didn't see it as a sort of privilege. I just get the director's parking slot and all that crap.
Yeah.
At all. I felt it as almost a responsibility.
And a pressure because of your very close relationship with your father and your family. You just didn't want to let them down.
Not at all. No, I wanted to succeed. And even now, I suppose it's funny you're asking this question of me now. I'm 62 years old. I've been CEO for 29 years. People still ask me. And
it's interesting.
It's true of any family business, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to carry on with what I call a multi-generational effort as a family, as an entrepreneurial family, there's going to be a founder at some stage, but then there are going to be lots of subsequent generations, hopefully.
But I mean, I think it was a Malcolm Gladwell book talking about how we underestimate just how much privilege successful people have had in life. And I remember my first job in the City of London, a couple of miles up the road when I had my interview in Fenchurch Street. The reason I got that interview is because I went to a school that was a rival school of my first boss, as it turns out, in the city as well. And I got in probably because he knew my school, and my sister had been at the same school as him. So I think we all underestimate how much privilege, whether it's coming from a stable middle-class background, having a good education, whatever it may be, we underestimate the role of privilege in getting our break and our career ladder.
I'd say my privilege in that sense slightly different. I mean, you mentioned I went to Oxford, Harvard Business School. But I learned more from my dad than I did in either of those places.
But I feel the same.
And I learned from him just sitting at the kitchen table, going out with him, visiting offices with him. And, I grew up in a business family.
Yeah.
And I think that does give you an advantage if you want to go into business. If both my parents had been teachers or police officers, I wouldn't have had the same input. I'd have probably become a teacher or a police officer.
Or ended up in media eventually. Maybe. Yeah. You never know. You could be interviewing me here, James. The other way around.
Or something like that. But it's sort of, it's interesting because you sort of imbue this stuff. And I'll tell you, I felt after going to Oxford, I enjoyed my time. I had to unlearn quite a lot. I mean, they make you think you're marvellous at Oxford and you're not. You're just a kid at 21 and you've got to go on with your life. And you've got to work hard.
There is a problem with too much education. I'll probably get myself into a lot of trouble for this. CNBC hires fantastic young people. They are amazing interns and amazing first starters, and they've had brilliant media education at all kinds of brilliant organizations. I personally think those individuals would be brilliant regardless of that education, but it's because they've spent all that extra money on their BA and their postgrad qualification that they've got in the door at CNBC, where actually as individuals, I think they are just as good and we could have trained them up anyway, regardless of 3-4 years in extra education.
Well, more and more people are asking themselves that question, thinking, do I need to go to university or should I just go and learn a trade or an apprenticeship?
But we have a similar view on this one, don't we?
Well, my view is, I think we do, Steve. My view is that too many people are going to do degrees at universities that don't help carry them forward afterwards and end up with a lot of debt, having spent 3 or 4 years doing something that won't help them progress in ways that they might desire.
As CEO of Reed, what are the biggest, most pivotal decisions that you've made?
I suppose one decision that changed the nature of our business was taking it private. It was a quoted company.
2003?
Yeah, it was a quoted company. My father listed the company in 1972, and we took it private in 2003. So I'm glad we did that because I didn't really suit our business model to be quoted because we weren't going to the market for funds. Mm-hmm. We weren't doing acquisitions. And so it wasn't a sort of pressing benefit to us, and there were costs involved. So we left that club. Yeah. At that time. And I guess, it's good in the way our successes and failures are to a degree private.
How different was running the company as a private company compared with a public company?
Well, I was the CEO then and, before we went private. I would have spent more time doing presentations to analysts in the city. I don't do that at all now.
No.
And answering questions.
But it hasn't inhibited the growth of the company?
I mean, the question I got asked most when I was the CEO of a public company, your father said that going public was his greatest mistake. What have you got to say about that? so eventually we answered that question by going private.
So I presume your father would just agree with you.
He was quite supportive. I suppose that was a decision he made at the time for good reason at the time. And later on, I think there was a picture of him in The Guardian that said, Alec Reed's business goes private after 31 uneventful years on the stock exchange. But he would have said, and he would have been right, that people who bought shares in the company got a good return on it, and he did too.
I was going to say, has it been a profitable decision?
Well, I don't know what the business is worth now, but I have no regrets. No, I don't. Well, it's not quoted, so there's not a daily price.
But I mean,
I've got
owners
an
of
idea.
businesses tend to know what their company's worth.
And you could look at the accounts and multiply the profits. I mean, it's not for sale.
No.
So, I don't really. I know that it's a good business, and I know that, it's valuable and needs to be looked after. Yeah. I wouldn't be able to put a price tag on it.
You were asked a while back by, I think it was a Harvard professor, what is the defining moment of your career? And I have the quote saying you were stumped. It was very clear when you sat back and thought about it what the big epiphany was in your life. And it came actually quite later on rather than in your early part of your career.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, for anybody, what is the defining moment of your career so far, I think he said. And it did take me, I was stumped because lots of things were sort of whirring in my mind. But then it came back to this one thing, which was nowhere near the office, and was a moment on a mountain called the Matterhorn in the Alps, when I fell and nearly died.
Twice.
Yeah. So you worked out I'm not a very good mountaineer.
No, I disagree. You were just pretty unlucky on the weather that
well,
day,
the weather was bad, and yeah.
But just going into a bit of detail, James, you were climbing with some great alpine experts and your son as well.
Yeah, so there were four of us. So I went with alpinist called Stefan Gatt, who's a friend and an amazing mountaineer. His claim to fame was he climbed Everest a few years ago with no oxygen and then snowboarded down from the top and was the first person in the world to do such a thing. So this kind of caught my attention, and he was giving a talk about this and got a big standing ovation. And I sort of sidled up to him to the end and said, any chance you'd take someone like me up Mont Blanc? He said, yeah, sure. And so we did this little trip up Mont Blanc, and then after that did many other trips in the Alps. So about a decade later, we went off to climb the Matterhorn. I was 50 at the time.
This is 2013.
2013, yeah. I was 50. My son Harry was 18. It was a sort of father-son bonding trip.
Yeah. Not going to the football or something. You just decided.
No, we do that too, but this seemed like an exciting thing to do. Climb the Matterhorn. And we got there in September and it snowed and the mountain was covered in snow. I should have smelt a rat when I didn't see anyone else on it. Yeah, but we headed up, and I was doing a traverse, crossing a snow slope, and the new snow that had fallen was on sort of hardened old ice that had been there all summer. And I slipped and I started sliding, pulling Stefan down with me.
You were roped together, you're pulling him down.
I was pulling him, he was coming down with, and he said, put your crampons in. These are the big sort of claws that you put on your boots. And the crampons, I tried to put my boots in, it didn't stick. I carried on sliding. And then I remembered I had an ice axe and it was on my chest, and I put the ice axe with all my weight into the snow and it stopped. And I was about a meter from oblivion, as was Stefan. And I remember still looking at him as I'm looking at you now, about that far apart, thinking just down there to our right was death. And this moment stayed with me ever since. And it got me thinking a lot. But then I fell again on the...
I was going to say, so there were two incidents on one mountain, both of which you could have died on.
So a lot of normal, right-thinking people think, what the hell were you doing carrying on? Which is what we did. I sort of bullheadedly wanted to get to the top of the Matterhorn. So we carried on. And then we didn't get to the top because the weather got worse and worse. There was icy winds and we could see the top, but we decided to head back. And it was later, after the next morning on the way down, we were abseiling, or I was abseiling. And I was at the end of a long rope, went off at an angle to join Stefan, slipped, and then I found myself at the end of what's called a pendulum fall. So if you put 100 kilos at the end of a long rope and swing it, swings from side, and I ended up dangling off the Matterhorn on this occasion. And I'd gone around a corner, and I remember Stefan's shouting, "Are you all right?" And I thought, well, I'm still alive. So I said, yeah, I'm all right. And he said, are you sure? And I said, well, yes, but I've broken my leg. And he said, how do you know you've broken your leg? And I said, because my foot's pointing in the wrong direction. So I was sort of dangling there, high up on the Matterhorn. And so he got a rope to me, pulled me to a ledge, and called the air ambulance. And this wonderful crew from Val d'Aosta in Italy came up and took me off the mountain, saved my life.
Am I right in thinking they wouldn't let your son watch one of the other climbers just turn?
Yeah, no, the first
son's
fall,
head away?
when we nearly went off the slope, he turned Harry's face away so he wouldn't see us fall off. It was that close. But why was this my defining moment? Well, it was I came back and I was smashed up, and I was in hospital for a bit, then in a wheelchair, and it gave me lots of time to think. And I was thinking, I suppose having turned 50, very much about the second half of my life. And I decided I really wanted to live it purposefully, and I wanted our business to make as big an impact as it could. And that's when we settled subsequently on improving lives through work as our purpose. And then I've subsequently written a book about values-led, purpose-driven businesses called, as you kindly mentioned, Karma Capitalism.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to encourage other companies to become philanthropy companies like us, where 10% or more of the shares are owned by a charity, because that really helps give them a superpower, I would say.
The fragility of life. Forget about business, forget about all the successes you've had and your father had and the successes you want to pass on to the rest of your family. The fragility of life flashed before you at that moment and changed who you are as a person. Yeah,
I think it did. I felt very lucky to be alive. And I still do, because it was very close. And I suppose I had 2 near-death experiences within 24 hours. And that, I guess, woke me up. I call it my wake-up fall. And it really was. And so I feel now, I had lunch with Stefan Gapp, my alpinist friend. And I said to him, he looked quite surprised.
I hope you paid, by the way.
I did pay. But I said to him, and he looked quite surprised. I said, looking back now, I'm quite glad that happened now. He looked a bit amazed, but it changed me as a person. It changed the way I think, and it changed my priorities. And I'm grateful for that.
And your wife banned you from mountain climbing, I presume?
Yeah, no, I'm not allowed to go mountain climbing. No, she didn't ban me. That's unfair on Nicola. So I promised her I wouldn't do it again. Okay. And poor Nicola was sort of pushing me around in a wheelchair, and she was incredibly kind to me. And we do have 6 children, so it was a pretty irresponsible thing to do.
I was going to say. Tell me a little bit about the book Karma Capitalism, and you came on Squawkbox recently to talk about it as well. The concept is quite difficult for a lot of, I think, corporate leaders watching to turn their companies, which are primarily for the benefit of shareholders and in some cases for broader stakeholders, but to turn that into a philanthropic venture. I'd imagine that's quite a jump for many companies. I can't see how they can make the decision to do so without enormous buy-in from shareholders and others.
Yeah, I accept that, Steve. So just to be clear, I mean, a philco, by definition, and it's defined in the book, is a company where at least 10% of the shares are owned by a charitable foundation.
And Reed, it's what, 18% at the moment?
Yeah, we're 18% at the moment. But I know in my father's legacy is going to go above 20%. So Reed is, let's say, 20% owned by the Reed Foundation Charitable Trust. So we say we work 1 day a week for charity. And that's highly motivational for people in the business. And it's also appealing to our customers. So what defines us as a philco is that shareholding. And I want to stress this because it doesn't change the way we do business. It changes what we are. It changes the DNA of the business. It's about being a different type of business rather than doing business differently. And that change in the DNA of the business, we discovered by accident, it gives it a sort of superpower. Yeah. Because people are much more committed to it. It's a really good business model. And my father, he's quoted in the book saying, I gave away 18% of the business. I'm glad I did that because it's made the business more successful. It's like an investment. You just look at it commercially, but also it's enriched his life and mine hugely through all the other things we've done with Big Give and philanthropically. So, but it does mean that someone has to be generous. Yeah, whether it's the founding entrepreneur or business family, they could issue more shares or they could give some shares away to a charity. But interestingly now, there are a lot of families who are facing challenges around inheritance tax in the UK in particular, where, if you have to pay 20% inheritance tax on business assets, a lot of families are thinking, well, we might have to sell our business to do that. Yeah. Well, no, they don't. They could give those shares to a charity of their own founding and become a philco and do really well. So I want to give some hope to those sort of businesses who are under a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Are you finding other companies are looking at the model seriously?
Yeah, I've had lots of people say, I really like this. Or people are saying, I'm setting up a new business. I'm going to set it up as a Philco. Yeah. People who've come out of the woodwork and say, well, actually, our company is a Philco. I never really realized, we've got a big charitable foundation stake because someone in a legacy gave their shares to a charity, and that's helped us, and we want to make more of it. So I think we're trying to build a movement of Philcos that support each other. And there are great businesses, around the world. I mean, IKEA is a Philco. Lego is a Philco. Carlsberg, Novo Nordisk, Maersk, Rolex. These are brilliant businesses. They're market-leading businesses. They make more money and last longer than regular businesses.
But they started off as family business, every single one of those.
Well, all businesses have someone starting them, don't they, at some point? And I suppose that
they've retained the very strong family connection.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting, you see. If you're an entrepreneur who started a business and you want a legacy, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
I mean, Alec Reid has a fantastic legacy, both through Big Give and the charities he started, and the business that we're continuing. And lots of entrepreneurs are interested in legacy and longevity. That wonderful professor you mentioned, from Lauren Cohen from Harvard, he asked another good question. He said, if I mention the words Carnegie and Mellon, the names Carnegie, what do you think of?
I think of big US philanthropists.
Yeah. They were robber barons before they became
robber barons. And I'm just halfway through the book about the robber barons.
And that's what I think.
But bigger European corporates starting from scratch who aren't already Philcos, unlike the likes you mentioned, Lego, IKEA, Maersk, Carlsberg, they're not going to change their corporate structure, are they?
Well, I don't know, because there's a lot of pressure on companies to take different routes. People are becoming more and more sort of disillusioned with business, and young people especially sort of feel, to me, quite alienated from society and business and commerce in ways that is not good. So I think this is a way for companies that take a long view to reconnect with people, actually.
Yeah.
And to participate in their communities in a new way that will be better for their long-term health as a business and better for the long-term health of their society.
What are the big decisions you've got left in your career that you really want to get right?
So, we talked about AI. We've got a new service offering called Read AI, which is in beta format. It has the potential, I think, to be really fantastic because it will change the way people look for work. Because when someone signs up with Read AI, they don't have to apply for jobs, but they surface in the searches that other people make.
Amazing.
So, and we're going to be paying a bonus to people who get jobs through Read AI, which will be a first, Steve.
You'll pay them a bonus.
Yeah, they get 300 quid when you get a job to buy a new suit or tie or shirt or whatever, and that will be a new thing, which is good for people. And it'd be very interesting, I think, because from the employer's point of view, they can create their job descriptions, and then the AI will basically do the job that Alec Reid did in Hounslow in 1960, which will be to surface good candidates for that particular job description and say, would you like to see any of these people? And then that client can say, yes, I'd like to see these three. We'd then go and ask them, would you like an interview? So it takes a lot of the pain and disappointment out of recruitment, actually. So here I'm seeing something that has the potential to really improve the way a market works using AI with, if it's well implemented. And what's not to say that could be mirrored in lots of other markets too. So, I'm not AI doom and gloom, but I do see it's going to take some jobs. It might well create some new ones.
What do you do as a CEO to find balance away from the working life?
Yeah, I'm not sure my wife would say I was balanced. She's always.
You're not the first person on this podcast
I can't claim
that.
to be a moderate, really. I that quote, everything in moderation, including moderation, always makes me laugh. So I'm probably a bit of an extremist by nature because I throw myself into things and I really want to see them through. But I like getting outdoors and I love horses. And I've got a black and white cob that I drive around the country lanes of Wiltshire with a horse and cart. I just love doing that. And that makes me very happy. And it's totally absorbing and relaxing. And I ride horses through the woods as well. So horses are my sort of therapists. I just find being with horses very relaxing. A horse can hear your heartbeat from like 10 feet away. So it knows exactly what mood you're in.
Are you a workaholic?
Well, I'm an addictive person.
Do you think a lot of CEOs are addictive people?
Yeah, it's a characteristic I see. I mean, I've obviously interviewed a lot of people myself through my podcast. There's a lot of entrepreneurial people that, you know, I think we're called neurodiverse these days. And I don't know if addictive is one of those, but it possibly is. I think I have an addictive nature, and I've learned as I've got older to try and channel that into more constructive activities other than sort of going to the pub and having too much to drink.
And how successful have you been channeling it into
I don't drink
the equine life and the outdoors?
I don't drink anymore. Those days are behind me. And so I think as I've got older, I've got better at doing that. But I feel very lucky because I love my job. And, you know, our brand message is Love Mondays. I think it's possible for everyone to find a job they really love.
But James, you even sing on the adverts about loving Mondays, don't you?
I do. I mean, I just feel lucky to love my work. I love work. I don't want to retire. I want to carry on. And I feel lucky that I feel like that.
James, it's just been a real privilege listening to your enthusiasm and your amazing ethos and your trying to get people to think about karma capitalism and Philco and that. So thank you very much indeed for sharing your professional journey with us. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, Steve, for giving me the opportunity. And I hope people have a look at karma capitalism, especially your important business audience. Thank you very much
indeed.
Thank you.
Speaking to James Reed has been incredibly fascinating. This wasn't a man who was the plucky outsider, the man who came from incredibly humble beginnings. Quite the opposite. James Reed grew up with immense privilege, a phenomenal education, including Harvard and Oxford, a father who was one of the top British businessmen, Sir Alec Reed. Now, the challenge for James Reed has been following in those mighty footsteps. How will you fill the boots of a very successful father and take over the baton from him as CEO of Reed Group? He did so, and he did so very successfully. What is fascinating as well is how that role evolved for him and how, through a life-changing event, he basically almost fell off a mountain in the Alps and almost died. It made him think very much about the fragility of life and about what purpose he wanted and what he wanted for his company as well. And he's developed that into a model for perhaps that others can follow, that isn't just about Reed, isn't just about Sir James Reed. It's about how other companies can find a charitable purpose, not only for their shareholders, but for society as a whole. Thank you for joining me on Executive Decisions. I would love to hear your feedback. Drop your thoughts in the comments or a review. And please hit that follow or subscribe button. On the next episode of Executive Decisions, I'll be speaking to the CEO of Euronext, Stefan Bujnar.
The defining force to make decision as a leader in a company or in any other situation, what is your appetite to be lonely?
I'm looking forward to it. We'll see you then.